Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend and coach and mentor, John Opalewski. And today, as promised, a special guest. John, how are you today?
Hey Jim, I'm doing well. I'm shivering here in Michigan along with everybody else. And we have an amazing guest with us today. He's not a stranger to us. He's been on our podcast before. He was up here in Michigan a while back and did a small church conference for us, and it was amazing.
Yeah,
And we
best.
are just so delighted to have Karl Vaters with us on the podcast today. Karl, welcome.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you again.
Yeah, Karl, we had you on, I think it was well over a year ago. It might have been even 2 years ago. And you told us your conversion story back then and how God called you into ministry. But we would love to hear that again from you. Just remind us how that all unfolded.
Sure. Yeah, I'm actually a third generation pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. My father was a pastor. And so I grew up in the church. Literally, my earliest memories are, going into church early with dad when he went to set up and trying to find places to, goof around in the church and all the secret entrances and all the doors that all the preachers' kids know, right? They were doing a series of special meetings during the week, and because they were doing the grown-up services upstairs, they did the kids services downstairs, and they had a Christian magician who came in. Like, he did the little magic trick. He'd put the black thing of sin in, and then the red thing representing the blood of Jesus, and then you pull out a white cloth and right, that kind of a thing, which seems so cheesy now, but it registered. I'm 60 some, almost 60 years later, I'm still talking about it. So it registered. And at the end of one of his talks, he gave the usual, presentation of salvation, and said, everybody has to make the decision for Jesus for themselves. Even if your father or mother is a Christian, your father or there might even be a pastor. It doesn't matter. You still need to make the decision yourself. And when they said that, I went, oh, okay. This isn't like a family heritage thing. I have to actually, okay, I need to do that. And I raised my hand and I went forward and I bowed my head and I gave my life to Jesus. I was about 6 at the time, and it took.
Amazing.
Yeah, it took.
Sinner, a 6-year-old hardened sinner, just saved by grace.
I
A magician?
the I don't even want to go into the horrors and the depths of depravity that I was engaged in at the time, because it's just too painful.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything, but there was a scandal. Some money
Yeah,
was missing from the money barrel. I'm not accusing anybody, but
it's actually part of my testimony was because this was during this was in the 60s and 70s,
yeah,
and we were in a downtown of a large city, and there were the hippies in the street, and there was a drug culture going on,
yeah,
and that was the time of Teen Challenge, and a lot of the books and testimonies we were hearing was about people coming out of gangs and drugs and out of those things. And after hearing several of those testimonies as a little kid, I'm like, I don't have a testimony. I haven't done any of that. Like, do I have to go and do that in order to have a testimony? So it was really true. And then a guy in our church, a young guy in our church who was 5 years older than me, maybe, went off to Bible college, came back and gave his testimony of how, he appreciates those who have that. And he pointed to people and, the Lord delivered you from this and the Lord delivered you from this. Well, my testimony is God saved me from all of that and kept me from all of that because I was raised in this church by a good, godly family, and I didn't have to deal with any of that. And that's my testimony, and I'm grateful for it. And I went, oh, okay, I can have that testimony.
Yeah.
Good.
I
yeah,
love, Karl, I love that testimony. I wish that was mine.
yeah, yeah.
I was a knucklehead before I gave my life to Jesus on a variety of levels. And I have some friends who gave their life to Jesus when they were 5 years old. And I just think, man, my life would have taken such a different trajectory if
Amen.
I would have met Jesus earlier in life. So we love that. We love that testimony. What about your call to ministry? Real quick, like how did you get a sense of that?
Yeah, I was always enamored with uh, not the church so much as in the church institution, but the people, the people
Mhm.
of God. every person who has really been a blessing in my life, every person I have ever found a reason to look up to, the reasons I have had to look up to them have had to do with their following Jesus. I've just been blessed by that. A godly family with godly people around me in the church all the time. And there were some people who behaved badly in Jesus' name as well. I had my share of that, just like everybody else does. But if I look at all the people, who are the people I admire the most in the world, and every single one of them were Christ followers. And so I looked at that and thought, okay, so I know I'm going to serve Jesus. I don't know how I'm going to serve Jesus. And as I was trying to sort that out, I had multiple people who saw a call of God to full-time ministry on my life, and they would tell me that, and I was grateful for that. But almost every one of them would, at the end of it, would add the words, "just like your dad."
Mm.
And I knew that pastoral ministry was not family business.
Yeah.
And so you're going to be this just like your dad. I was like, that's not the way that works. And is that all I'm feeling? So I really wondered, maybe that's all I'm feeling. Maybe all I'm feeling is, hey, I'm admiring my dad and I want to go into business like my dad. And I realized I had to get us, just like my conversion story, I had to make a separate decision from my family heritage for that.
That's
and so
really
I really
cool.
pushed back against it for a couple of years. I went to junior college and took, my general ed, and everything that I majored in, I majored in journalism, I majored in law, all the things that seemed to make sense with the way my brain works. And every time I'd declare a major, I would flame out on the classes in that major.
Right.
Until literally what happened was I took a speech class because I was terrified to talk in front of people. Terrified. I mean, I'd get sick. And I said, okay, Lord, this is my fleece, right? From Gideon, right? I'm going to put a fleece before you. If I can't get through this speech class without panic, then I'm not called to ministry, and you're going to have to give me something else. And if I am called to ministry, you're going to have to make it really obvious that I'm going to be really good at this. And I remember getting up for that first speech. I was terrified. I stood up, I looked at the room and went, oh, this isn't so bad. And I went through my speech. It was like a 7-minute speech. I sat down, and the teacher, while the next person was up doing their speech, the teacher handed me a note down the line, and I opened it up, and it said, please see me about speech competition.
Wow.
And I went, oh, okay. I wanted it obvious. That's obvious.
There it is.
I guess I'm going in pastoral ministry. Yeah.
Right on. That's great. I love that story because I was afraid there was going to be another magician that your dad had to hire to come in. I'm glad it was college. You're an adult,
Or a clown the next time.
You've written a great book, and I say that because I think nowadays it's fairly simple to write a book. It's not easy, but the path of self-publishing and so forth. But the book you wrote, I would say 80% of it I had thought of, but I didn't have evidence for. You did a lot of research. It's called Decising the Church. And could you just kind of give us this isn't like a book promotion, but man, I want to hear from the author. What's the big idea of decising the church? And then where do you hope it's really going to be applied?
Sure. For 12, a little over 12, almost 13 years now, I've been doing the ministry of helping small churches thrive. And for the last 5-6 years, my wife and I, as we've been traveling and spending time at conferences like I was at with you, almost every conference we would have at least one, sometimes multiple conversations with pastors, sometimes retired pastors, who would come to us with tears in their eyes, telling us, this is the first time I've ever heard that the church of my size is valid as it is right now. The first time I've left a conference not feeling guilty that my church is small. Retired pastors going, I thought I retired from full-time ministry as a failure because I never pastored a big church. And this is the first time it's been confirmed I wasn't a failure. I was faithful. Thank you for this. I mean, literally with tears in their eyes. And at conference after conference, we'd be driving away afterwards and going, man, I feel like we're pulled another body out of the river today.
Yeah.
That was a phrase we kept using. We were pulling bodies out of the river. And so a couple of years ago, I thought, okay, I'm going to keep pulling bodies out of the river if this is what God continues to call me to do. But why don't we drive upstream a little and see who's tossing the bodies in? So I thought, what's causing this obsession with size that is becoming so debilitating for so many pastors? And so I thought, well, let's do a deep dive into the church growth movement and see if that's the culprit. And so I did a deep dive into the church growth movement, which turned into a deep dive into American history, which turned into like I never thought I'd ever write an entire chapter on the rise of the suburbs. But I found all kinds of stuff that I didn't realize, and the Lord helped me to put some things together. As you said, Jim, the stuff that you've kind of seen and known and thought, but and as it came together, it was like, oh, and so I haven't had anybody come back to me, including church growth advocates. Nobody has come back to me and disputed the data,
right?
Disputed the history or disputed the research. They might have a disagreement with where I land and with my conclusions, but the research, the history, and the data has been really well researched. And God bless my publisher and my editors at Moody. They required me to go get original sources for everything. They were very, very picky. If you're going to make these claims, you're going to have the data to back it up. So that's where it came from. Yeah,
love it.
So, Karl, on page 25, I read this statement. It says this: our obsession with numerical addition is idolatry, addiction, and lust. Well, that really jumped out at me, that sentence. I don't think I've ever read that in a book ever. Can you enlarge on that statement? Because I think there's a lot there. I'd love for you to unpack some of that for us.
Yeah, I've got to give some credit to Todd Wilson, Ed Stetzer, and who's the third one? Maybe. Well, let me look it up in my own book here. It's amazing how often, as an author, you've got to reference your own work to go, I said that, really? Where did that come? And Warren Bird. So yeah, these are three, pretty good authorities in church leadership who have a good idea of what the church world looks like, especially in America. And they each at different points use those terms. And so I put them together into a single sentence, but I want to give them credit. So let's look at the words together one at a time, right? First of all, idolatry. I'm going to start with the strongest of the three because that's where I put it in the sentence. Our obsession with numerical is idolatry. Why do I make that claim? Because all of us have known far too many pastors who have been given the choice between compromise your values to get the numbers up, or stick with your values and risk losing people. Yeah. And while the vast majority of pastors make the right decision, there are far too many examples where they've made the wrong decision and they've compromised their values. And that's idolatry. When you put anything ahead of your integrity, anything ahead of biblical principles, that becomes an idol. And for a lot of people, that happens. In fact, since I wrote the book, Matt Redman, who has written so many songs that we all sing, put out a video on YouTube called "Let There Be Light." He put it out about 6-9 months ago, and in it he makes the claim that in the 1990s, when he was becoming a worldwide known person for all of the songs he was singing, the person who oversaw the ministry that brought him up was in fact sexually and physically abusing him. Mm-hmm. And he put out the video to tell about this because he's tried to get people to address it. And according to him, nobody has. And in just this half-hour video that he put out, interviewing multiple people, there are 5, 6, or 7 at least direct quotes from different people he interviewed who said something along the lines of, yeah, we knew something wasn't quite right, but look at all the people coming to Jesus. Or, yeah, he was a little bit out of control over here, but how you can't argue with success. Like 5 or 6 times they mentioned that his numerical increase basically provided cover for his sin. So that's idolatry. Secondly, addiction. How many of us chase after numbers, after numbers, after numbers? And if you don't succeed, then it begins to debilitate you. And even if you do succeed and you get those numbers, then next year you got to top yourself because the high doesn't retain, just like any other addiction. And then finally, lust. It's a lustful thing to put numbers ahead of our integrity. Yeah.
Yeah. Karl, I think about the addiction piece, and I wonder if some of it is chemical addiction in a sense, that cortisol and adrenaline and that we get
dopamine hit.
Yep. Yes, that comes from, more and bigger and larger. And then when it's not present and it starts to go the other way, we don't know what to do with ourselves, right?
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you unpacking that. That really helps me have a better sense of what you were driving at there, and I really appreciate that.
Thanks.
Yeah. So just a distinction here, and I want to read this. But the difference between paying attention to numbers and obsession with numbers. Um, I think that I've heard you say many times, you're not against large churches. You're not against
Yeah.
small churches. You're for the church. Um, but where's a line that our listeners can go, okay, I think I might have crossed that line, or I'm well on this side of the line, or man, I'm way over that line. Well, we've all heard the verse about, knowing the condition of your flocks and knowing where you're at, and it's called stewardship and attendance.
Mhm.
And I know there's a line of pride that might be obvious, but in your mind, Karl, talk to healthy people about how to stay healthy. And maybe in that, there'd be a warning to people that aren't quite healthy enough when it comes to paying attention versus being obsessed with.
Yeah. Um, Metrics are important. And in fact, in the book, there's an entire chapter entitled "What the Church Growth Movement Got Right." And I didn't put it in there just to, do the compliment sandwich. I really have great appreciation for a lot of the things that the Church Growth Movement did. And this is an insider, a friend trying to assess, hey, here are some areas that we need to be careful about. It's been around long enough now that we can see some of the unintended negative consequences.
Right.
But I believe one of the things the church growth movement got right was it helped us to understand the value of some metrics that we weren't paying attention to before, so that we can objectively understand whether or not things are going well. So paying attention to numbers is important. As an example, small church pastors will often ask me about this. How should I administer and manage things? Should I, if I'm not striving for growth, what should I do? And here's my one of my several answers to that. If you're pastoring a church of, let's say, 50, just to pick a number, you should pastor it like a church of 50 should be pastored. Mm-hmm. But you should immediately and constantly be working on systems, on processes that would be appropriate for a church of 100.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That way, one, if the numerical increase does happen, you won't lose it because you're not prepared for it. Two, even if the numerical increase doesn't happen, better to operate as a church of 50, but be ready for 100 so that you've got some margin rather than operating at 100% constantly.
Mm.
You want to build margin in, and if you can build. So our church right now, it's one of the things I learned through my process of, that I've talked about before. When I realized that, okay, I'm pastoring a church of 150, like it's a church of 150, trying to get to bigger, but I'm running with no margin in my life. Mm-hmm. And so we went back to discipleship and training our own people and raising up our own leaders so that there were redundancies in every single position where anybody could take time off and have somebody else step up and adequately cover for their position in a way that would not hurt the church and that would be strong and that would raise the leadership of the entire church. So you've got to build margin into your life. So understanding what it's like to pastor at the current size is important, but preparing for larger is also important, even if you don't get bigger. So the size dynamic and the understanding of size differential matters as a tool to help us rather than as an obsession to drive us.
Yeah,
that's really helpful.
Yeah,
that's so good. I think about just the forward thinking there. That, hey, we're at 50, but who knows what God might do? Let's prepare for. And I like the fact that you didn't say prepare for 500. It's like let's prepare for 100. Yeah. And because it reminds me of running the mile in high school. If I tried to pace myself I was a sprinter and my coach made me run the mile. He was not a nice guy. And and if I tried to pace myself with the guy that was running, in the fours for the mile, and I'm old, so we used to run the mile back then, I would just be so discouraged. I had to pace myself kind of with the guy that was a little bit in front of me, not the guy that was way in front of me. So I appreciate because I do think some of us fall into that trap of thinking I've got to prepare to be 10x of what I am right now. And so I just appreciate the,
What I heard you say, Carl, is like the reason we count numbers is for strategy, not identity. Is that maybe a quick way to say that? That hey, I'm now a
Beautifully
church of this,
phrased.
but if I'm really going to be somebody, I got to be a church of that or whatever that is. So there's a strategy to growth that a leader should be coming up with. It's not like it's okay to be sloppy regardless of the size of the ministry you're responsible for. So there's a strategy. But if strategy slips into now, hey, my identity is I'm a church pastor of X number of people, that would be a good sign that we've taken on an unchrist-like or a without Christ identity. Is that a good
Yeah,
encapsulation?
strategy, not identity, is a wonderfully, nearly poetic way to express it. That's great. Where were you a year ago when I was finishing the editing on this book?
yeah. Hey, Carl, I had a question for you. We've talked about the obsession with
Yeah.
addition being having the idolatrous possibility to it. Is it possible to be idolatrous in the opposite direction too? Like where we almost obsess or over and we're proud of
Oh yeah.
how small we are. I just wonder what you think about
Oh
that.
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I've run into that regularly. There's this self-righteousness sometimes that some of my small church friends have. I've even a couple times heard phrases like, the only reason we're so small is because we're the only one in town's preaching the true gospel.
Right.
It's
Mm.
like, what? It was like, okay, is your church literally the only church in your town? If so, the statement's unnecessary. Uh, and if not, the statement's almost certainly untrue.
Yeah.
And your pride over your smallness is just as much a problem as pride over your bigness. There's. I've got a part of one of the talks that I do when it comes from Small Church Essentials that small is not a problem, a virtue, or an excuse.
Yeah.
So you
Mm.
see small as a problem, that's fairly typical, but there are also those who see small as a virtue, and small is not a virtue either.
I love that. I've never, I'm sure I hear this all the time. I've never met someone who made everybody that was drunk on something sober and happy about it all at the same time. So I'm all excited about numbers. That got sobered up and we were healthier because of it, or we're depressed, or this is my identity. I could have filled this building 10 times if I was willing to compromise like these other churches around here. So I
Yeah.
appreciate I don't know, fatherly. I don't mean to make you older than everybody else. Matter of fact, how old you are, last I knew, it's 60 some years you were guessing, but yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. All right. The last question I had here for you is in your opinion, what's the pastor of the local church just ultimately aiming for? In other words, I go to a conference, they say it's groups. I go to another conference, they say it's prayer. I go to another conference, they say it's evangelism. I go to another conference. We're all grasping for that next thing that fixes the thing.
Yeah.
But from you've talked to thousands of leaders now that serve local congregations of all sizes. You've been called upon internationally. Church planners want your time. Your books are selling because there's great information there. So what is the bullseye if you were to stand before a kid who's about to pastor his first church, or maybe an old man my age that's about to pastor his last church, and he's never gotten it right? What is the bullseye we should be shooting for?
Yeah, in desizing the church, after walking through some of these challenges, the book makes a turn in its last third toward here are some solution ideas.
Yeah.
And the first two chapters of the turn each have fairly bold titles. So let me give you each of those titles because these will answer your question. The first title where we make the turn is a chapter entitled "Discipleship Fixes Everything."
Mm-hmm.
And I came up with the title because as I was putting the last third of the book together, I had this jumble of all these ideas. Here are some ways to look at it. And, so I'm taking, all of these things and I'm going, I got to put them into some order that makes some sense here. I can't just throw random ideas around. And so I'm looking at it going, oh, that one's kind of about discipleship. And I look at the next one and go, well, that's about discipleship. I look at the next one and go, well, that's about discipleship. And as I'm doing it, I'm going, man, it's like discipleship fixes everything. And I went, oh.
Yeah.
And then I asked myself, is that true? Does discipleship actually fix everything? And think about it. You can't think of a problem a local church can have that discipleship won't fix.
Right.
Finances, immorality, disunity, lack of volunteers, vision, you name it. Discipleship fixes it. It's almost like that's what Jesus told us to do.
Yeah, somebody should write that.
I think I read that somewhere.
Yeah.
Maybe
So
Matthew.
discipleship is the one. And then the next chapter is this. Integrity is the new competence.
Mm-hmm.
For 40 years during the church growth movement, again, something I have great appreciation for, we've been teaching people competence and strategies, and we've been assuming that they're people of integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't need to look around too much, and I don't need to give you any names for us all to realize we can't assume integrity anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There's been too many examples of that not being where we thought it should be. So we can't assume integrity anymore. So the two things I would say to any longtime pastor or brand new pastor are this: disciple God's people and be a person of integrity.
Love it.
There's no strategy that will beat those two things.
And that's a long-term strategy, right? That's not the world's biggest popsicle promotion. That's be the best man, best woman in the room promotion. And that takes time. We say this a lot on here, but nobody can name 5 sermons that changed their life. But everybody can name 5 people that have changed their life.
Yeah.
And discipleship's interesting. There's a season, there's a people, and there's a place. It might have been 20 years ago, but if you're a disciple today, I promise you, the petri dish of that discipleship, there was a people or a person, there was a place, and there was a season of time. And creating those petri dishes in our ministry so people can be discipled, I think is brilliant.
Yeah.
Karl, thank you.
Because discipleship disconnected from relationship isn't discipleship, it's just teaching. And teaching is good, but let's not confuse the two. Discipleship requires both teaching and relationship, and behavior. It requires all three.
Right. An indoctrinated Christian is not a disciple.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? An indoctrinated, I can repeat what you've taught me, but I can't live
Yep.
the first sentence of it. That's not discipleship. Yeah, right on. I have one complaint, and that is there's never enough time with you. And we're drawing to the end of our episode here in that. And so here's my plea. Will you give us one more? Because I still have 18 questions. I haven't even started the talk. Could you come back to the episode?
All right, we can do that. Let's go.
Right on. John, do you want to close us out today, or what's your thought on that?
Yeah, sure. I will. So, Karl, how can somebody who wants to get a copy of your book, Desizing the Church, where should they go to get that?
Anywhere you buy books, you can buy it. Anything that I do, you can get at karlvaters.com. So my podcast, my books, my articles, videos, anything else that you want to get, use that as the main hub. And from there, you can find anything you need.
Now, some people are listening, they're not watching. So spell Karl and Vaters. Otherwise,
yeah. Oh, I know. It sounds like a simple name, but it really isn't. It's got multiple pitfalls. It's Karl with a K.
Okay.
Vaters with a T in the middle, and don't forget the S at the end. Yes.
Right on. Yes. This is awesome. Well, I hope that everybody's watching and listening has gotten out of this what John and I do. We're often involved in people's lives in the coaching world where if they just heard what was said, they wouldn't need us. Does that make sense? I'm not saying that we wouldn't love to be on your best day or your worst day, but a lot of worst days could be avoided if we just settled into the calling of God on our lives. Made disciples, stayed humble, got a vision from God, served people faithfully for decades. This is the good stuff, guys. So thank you, Karl, for your time. Thank you, John, for having a platform that we can hear about this on. And if there's anything Converge can do for you, convergecoach.com, there's a link right at the very top of the page. You'll notice the very first thing is a link saying we'd like to spend half an hour with you. One of our team, just to listen. How can we help? What can we do to be a part of what God's doing in your ministry or in your leadership, in your business? And so go to that. It's a free thing, no strings attached. And we're just so grateful that you invested this time. Thank you for it. And may you just continue, just keep going, keep pressing, keep enjoying your life as you continue to lead from alignment.